Hi friends, I'm Les Mood, your host. Welcome to the Destination for Innovation series, brought to you by the City of Bakersfield and GreenTech Network. Today we're at RE Plus in Las Vegas, and we have a special guest from AutoGrid. Anton, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Anton, could you tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe something your colleagues or the world doesn't know about you?
Okay, well, let's see. I'll tell you something energy related. I've been wanting to get into the clean tech space for a really long time, but I've only been working in it for a year and a half. But around 2008, I bought an old Mercedes diesel that was converted to run on vegetable oil. And I would go around to local restaurants and collect waste vegetable oil, put it in the trunk, bring it down to my basement and filter it, and then bring it back upstairs and put it into the secondary gas tank. So half the time when I drove around, it smelled like calamari. So that was probably my first attempt to have an impact, which I think may have been positive. I don't know.
Well, it's funny, a lot of people have these side projects to make some beer, make some alcohol. I might have to nickname you Willie, though, because you know how Willie makes the biodiesel for his car.
Yeah, okay, here you go.
So you said a year and a half. Where do you feel like you could point to that your journey began in the clean tech space?
Well, so my journey, and I think I really started wanting to do it right around 2007, 2008, when the Obama administration did the ARRA funding, right, and all the smart meters rolled out. I was working for EMC at the time, so an enterprise data storage company, and so one of the first problems that funding created was that smart meters are now sending in data every 15 minutes. As opposed to somebody driving around a truck and recording it monthly. And it was really hard for utility companies to just hold onto all that data with their traditional Oracle databases. So EMC had a product called GreenTech, which was an unstructured database, and we partnered with a company called Silver Spring Networks to basically just capture all that data. And so it was at that time that it became clear to me that my interest in big data was kind of starting to overlap with my interest in trying to do something positive for the environment. So that's when it started.
Wow, that's really cool. In fact, speaking of overlapping, we had ESS's CEO Eric on Silver Spring. So it's a really small world. So what are you doing these days to advance a better world with clean tech?
So working for AutoGrid, so I finally got the opportunity. So back at that time when I was working for EMC, I was in a really cool role. My title is technical evangelist. I don't think I'll ever have a better title in my career, but I had the latitude really to work with companies in any industry vertical, right? So EMC had a product called Pivotal, which itself was a data analytics platform. I went to a conference that was run by it was called SoftGrid, run by a company called GreenTech Media, which you may have heard of, right? And I actually sat on a panel. I had the audacity, not knowing anything about the utility industry, to sit on a panel to talk about the big data problem, the big data opportunity. So I was sitting on stage with some utility executives. They didn't know anything about big data. I didn't know anything about the utility industry, but it was really, okay, now that we've captured all this data that's coming in from the meters, now what do we do with it? Do we focus on OpEx use cases, on asset management, on customer experience management? And if you know the big data space, that's a universal conversation you have no matter what industry you're in. Anyways, at that conference I met Amit Narayan, the founder of AutoGrid, and we had a conversation about, hey, do you think there might be a partnership opportunity? And at that time, he said no, because we kind of had overlapping products. But I sort of stayed in touch with him. I was checking out what AutoGrid was doing on LinkedIn. It was over 10 years. And about 2 years ago, I reached out, and I was lucky enough that he needed somebody to manage partnerships for him, and that's how I ended up at AutoGrid. But I feel like working for AutoGrid is finally aligning something that I care about with my professional interests. So that's what I'm doing, I think, to do some good in the environmental space.
Yeah, AutoGrid's an important company in the industry. Along your journey, would you be able to point to some challenges and maybe opportunities yourself, or maybe that you've witnessed or been a part of, that people could learn from that you'd like to share?
In terms of to the career change,
Industry, like, the company growth, or some challenges that you've seen in the industry in general that may be also tremendous opportunities.
Yeah. Okay. So I think on the company level, I've been on both sides of the table in terms of working for a massive company. I worked for IBM, I worked for EMC, I worked for Dell, and then working for a small company. So I worked for AutoGrid now. My previous company was a startup called Cardinality. And so when a large company takes interest in a smaller company, the benefits are generally that the large company gets some innovative technology that they didn't have, and the small company gets the potential market reach of the larger company. But there's a lot of maybe unforeseen challenges, like we sell SaaS software, and Schneider, which is traditionally a hardware company that also sells software, but it's like traditional perpetual license. There are business model challenges, and there are the challenges of us like socializing and training training the Schneider the sales team to really articulate the value of AutoGrid, to be able to qualify opportunities for us, and it's a journey. And what I found a really positive thing with Schneider is that they really get what AutoGrid does. They acquired us for a reason. So they're willing to basically learn and grow with us and suffer the growing pains along with us. So I think the challenges from an industry perspective right now, AutoGrid was founded in 2011, so we're a 12-year-old company. When I joined, I thought, okay, we're a fairly mature market space at 12 years, but that's not really the case. AutoGrid started with demand response, residential and commercial. That's a pretty well-known problem domain, right? So a utility wants to be able to ask its ratepayers, to use less electricity for a certain time period during times of peak demand. It could be a heat wave, it could be any kind of event. But what we're doing now, which is called DERMS, it's a much broader way of looking at distributed energy resources, right? So it incorporates microgrids, electric vehicles, either on a residential scale or electric vehicle fleets. It's storage, large solar farms with storage. And if I didn't say microgrids already, microgrids. So larger and larger aggregations of DERs. How do you manage those? And now it's not just about it's not just a utility asking customers to use less during certain times, but now customers can sell electricity back to the utility, so the utility can use that as a new source of supply. So our latest, venture is virtual power plants, where, really the value proposition is displacing physical power plants, centralized distribution that requires more transmission and distribution lines with energy that's, in the network, right? So so the challenge there is that it's such a new space. Everybody sees, hey, there's a lot of potential here, but nobody really knows. The business models are evolving. And so in my role as VP of Partnerships, that's probably the most challenging part of my role, is how do we develop an ecosystem of partners, a coalition of businesses that we all know where the value is for each player as we deliver these new models. So it's really new, and so there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of work, but if it's in a space you care about, then
you make it work, right? It's a lot of work, but you got to make it work. And for the people or the companies or industry in general, from all of your experience, do you have some advice that you might like to share? So in the industries, kind of advice like career, maybe from a public policy perspective, or advancing technology.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'll start right here with RE+, right? this is a massive show, and this is my first RE Plus. And from what I hear from people who've been to prior ones, this is much bigger than last year and the year before. And I saw the same thing at DistribuTech. So I think from a public policy standpoint, obviously in the U.S., the IRA is a huge source of funding that has, I think, made people see that you can really enter into the space and benefit from a lot of public spending. So I don't know if it's advice, but I guess one of the things that I think about is this a bubble, right? Because we saw that around the 2010 timeframe. There was a lot of investment in clean tech, and then, but not enough buyers, right? So there was a bust. I think things are much different now, at least in terms that I think, there's still a lot of climate change deniers out there, but I think that their influence is waning in the sense that all you have to do is listen to the news, read the news, watch the news. Every other day, there's a flood, there's a wildfire, there's a massive hurricane. It's horrible that has to be what's happening now for people to realize, like, wow, okay, we have a problem. I don't know. So I guess my fear is that maybe because of all the new spending, there might be a bubble. But my hope is that people actually see it, that there is a problem here that we need to solve. So I don't know if that's advice. It's more of an...
Yeah, I think observation is very important in helping people decide what they're going to do. And I think you described it pretty eloquently. And it could be a bubble, but it's certainly a massive opportunity now. But there's a lot of work to do. So speaking of a lot of work to do, in this next part of the interview is really kind of a thought experiment to cast away all the things that are standing in our way, inhibitions, roadblocks, and try to figure, what the possibilities are. Are you ready? Okay. So the first one is really easy. It's what are some low-hanging fruit that you could think of or share that people, companies, society could bite into to make the world a better place?
And I'll answer through an AutoGrid lens, right? Because, and I think that as we look at the future vision of decentralized power generation, lots of batteries, lots of solar, lots of wind, how do we get there, right? And then there's also the question of, I mentioned microgrids before, microgrid versus macrogrid, right? So why don't we have massive solar farms in Arizona with, huge high voltage transmission lines back to the population centers that need that energy? Because there's permitting issues. There's lots of complexity. But so for low-hanging fruit, I think it's looking at, local solutions, right? Starting with the home. If I put rooftop solar in my house, how do I benefit as a homeowner, right? When my electricity bills get lower. Yes, there's also the benefit of participating in demand response, but it's really just about having more control over what I'm consuming, and then you kind of expand that out to the community. I think AutoGrid's got a lot of community choice aggregator partners as well as co-ops, which are, community-based organizations that take control over where they buy their electricity from. They benefit from the buying power of buying as a community. So I think that's definitely an area where, progress is already being made, particularly in California, but, in various parts of the country. So I think I'd like to see, I think we're going to see more of that. And then, moving away from residences, if you look at industry. So industry, agriculture, right, wherever there's a lot of heat-based processes or cold storage, for example. So AutoGrid with Schneider won a great deal with a company called True Current, which is an energy as a service provider. They work with US Foods, which is the country's second largest food distributor. They've got cold storage warehouses all across the country. They want those things to be resilient. So if the grid goes down, the food's not going to spoil. It's going to be millions and millions of dollars in losses. Now, so that's benefit number one is resilience. Now, how do we connect that to the grid to maybe sell some surplus energy back to the grid? So I don't know. Is that low-hanging fruit? I think so. I think, so there's so much innovation. If you go around this show, there's so much innovation happening. But I think what you hear folks like Jigar Shah and other kind of visionaries say is that if public policy can align with the private sector, 80%, give or take, of the technology that needs to exist to really help move us toward net zero exists today. So I think that we need to find ways to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. The local approach, the microgrid approach, is really low-hanging fruit, and it's something that people can bite into, and communities and companies, industries. Super exciting. I'm curious what you may see to be some of the bigger challenges and opportunities that we shouldn't ignore that we could also bite into.
Yeah. Well, I think so. We can't. The 800-pound gorilla, or maybe there's more than one 800-pound gorilla, but the one I think of is the resistance from the oil industry, right? And so on the one hand, you see a lot of large oil companies, oil and gas companies, making huge investments in clean energy, and they're often doing it at an industrial scale, large front-of-the-meter utility scale batteries, and providing stability into the grid. So that's good. But then at the same time, you have a lot of pseudoscience and think tanks that are funded by special interests that don't want to see us turn away from the oil-based economy. I think that that's something that we need to really stay focused on, and that's a tough that's a tough nut to crack. So I think that, and then of course permitting reform is a very complex issue, because not only is it complex, you have multiple stakeholders, in terms of NIMBY, the NIMBY mentality. I don't want to look at a transmission line. I don't want to look at wind towers off my thing. But then you also have environmentalists fighting environmentalists, right? Because a lot of the permitting restrictions that are in place now are there to protect endangered species and wetlands and things like that. So how do you work around that? And then disadvantaged communities, right? Because peaker plants, transmission lines are often located near, poor neighborhoods, and they make people sick. It's been shown, and so I think maybe a low-hanging fruit in regards to permitting is the virtual power plant, right? Because you can obviate the need for a new peaker plant by tapping into clean, renewable energy in a distributed way using software like AutoGrid. So I don't know if that was a good answer to your question, or if that was...
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think the bigger scale and permitting is a huge issue. Disadvantaged communities and, diversification of economies are challenging situations. And I'm kind of curious what you may see in community as a broad term, but what role community plays in advancing a better world.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because, as a business, most of the time I'm thinking of it through a for-profit lens, right? But there's a lot of really cool not-for-profit activities. So I mentioned co-ops. That's one example of, there's so many different kinds of co-ops. There are agricultural co-ops, there are energy co-ops, there are food co-ops. And it's a model that I think that I'm hoping will start to proliferate more and more. People taking control of what their community needs, and then benefiting from the even the profits of energy generation. And I kind of like, I had a thought not too long ago when I was listening to a story about petrostates, so everything from Russia to Venezuela to Saudi Arabia, where regardless of the ideology or who's in charge, generally those countries tap into those massive profits and take a lot of it and then plow it back into social programs. And regardless of what you think about, that from an economic or ideological standpoint, I thought like, okay, well, what could be the analogy of like, I don't know what you even call it, a carbon-free state, but if you think about starting with a co-op, like if you are, okay, actually, a different way to think about it is look at ERCOT, right? So last week, energy prices went up to $5,000 a megawatt. I just read something about a Bitcoin mining company just shutting down their operations, making $35 million 1 year just selling energy into ERCOT. And it's like, okay, well, good for them, but that's a huge profit. What if we thought like a petrostate and we kind of tapped into those profits and redistributed them? I know that's a bad word, so I think that as we look, so we have an AI-based platform. I think what our AI does is good, but everybody looks at AI, they're scared about job losses in particular, and of course more dystopian scenarios, but let's just focus on job losses. Not just AI, but technology more and more is displacing more and more workers, and in some cases eliminating entire categories of work. And the jobs aren't going to come back. So things like guaranteed minimum income are being talked about and taken a lot more seriously than maybe at times in the past. And I think that there's a way to think about the co-op model, about plowing, energy profits back into the community that could be beneficial.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. Co-ops and CCAs and community-based progress and reinvestment it sounds very exciting. I think it's the future we're headed to in terms of more local diversification and reinvestment. Tremendous opportunity with what you're doing today, and when you're retired and looking back, what would you like to see as a result of your efforts?
Yeah, well, it's funny because I've had a long career, and I just got into GreenTech a year and a half ago. Maybe if I had tried a little bit harder, I'd have gotten in earlier, but we'd still be at the stage we're at, and I'd still be the same age. So I guess what I'm saying is like, God, I wish I didn't get into this as an old man. But you know what? It's like, it is what it is. So, and I think it's a Chinese proverb, plant a tree that you're not going to be able to sit under the shade of, right? But so I don't think about it necessarily. I'll divide it into like what I would like to see in my lifetime, and then what I would like to the future to be like. In my lifetime, I would like to see back to politics, a lot less politicization about the climate change threat, and it's not just like domestic. It's not just like Democrats versus Republicans. And by the way, there are a lot of Republicans who aren't climate deniers, so it's not necessarily cut along party lines. But what we're doing, like I question, with the IRA, I know like the Biden administration had to please a lot of stakeholders just to get that thing across the line. And if you look at what it is, it's like a kitchen sink. It's like, okay, we're trying to fund climate initiatives, but we're also trying to be competitive against China. And now I'm not saying China's not a threat and we shouldn't take that threat seriously. But I think from a technology standpoint, that when you have different regions of the world just not talking to each other, you're going to have different standards. You're going to have a lack of interoperability. And I think that's ultimately, if we're looking at a problem like climate change, which is a global problem, it really concerns me that we seem to be moving in that direction. So yeah, I know part of it's about supply chain and everything else, but I think in my lifetime, I would like to see a little bit more global R&D cooperation and a little less protectionism. And then down the road, I would like to see a completely decentralized, peer-to-peer sharing, I said utility. The reason I said utility is because utilities are our customers, right? And I know that if you look at the traditional regulated utility business model, that's got to go away. That doesn't mean utilities have to go away. I think that they will play a role in terms of infrastructure. It's almost like telecom. Like when telecom is deregulated, you had Ma Bell, and then all these competitors started leasing, the lines that Ma Bell had built, and so was that good for the consumer? Was it bad for the consumer? I don't know, but I think that I would just like to see, a world where we have 100% clean energy, and it just works. I mean, one of the things that it's back to impediments or what we're seeing more and more of as more different kinds of DERs are brought into the mix is more complexity, and things are going to get a lot more complex. Now for an AI-based software platform like AutoGrid, that's kind of good news because we like complex problems to solve. But I think that, I don't know, I would just like to see a software-driven, distributed energy.
Yeah, that's really a great vision, a decentralized, intelligent grid that empowers people, communities. I share your vision. I really appreciate you sharing that. I'm curious if you think at the end of the day, is it possible for a just and equitable energy transition to happen? And if so, how?
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's mandatory. So one example I already cited was virtual power plants displacing peaker plants. So back to Jigar Shah, another number that he cited was that it's estimated that U.S. ratepayers in total pay $40 billion a year just to keep peaker plants online and maintained. So if the faster we can get rid of that and return that money into the ratepayers' pockets, well, that helps everybody across the board. With equity, it's and then of course, if you are getting rid of polluting power plants, and then you're helping the disadvantaged communities that those power plants are built nearby. But then there's also the question of, okay, let's look at how residential solar has been rolled out just in California. People who could afford to put rooftop solar on their houses did. They tend to be more, middle class, upper middle class, and rich. And so utilities still have to, maintain their infrastructure. So a lot of the rates go up for the people who don't have solar, and those people tend to be disadvantaged. So I think that the more, again, back to community choice aggregators, electrification of buildings, community solar. How can we make solar available to apartment buildings, to renters? How can we make it easier for EVs, whose prices are already coming down, to be affordable for people who can't afford, a high-end EV, and chargeable for somebody who doesn't own a house and can't install a charger. So I think that's another way. And then I think looking at how we can, I'm going to use the word redistribute twice. I was feeling maybe a shot because there's such polarization around language these days. But how can we share in, and maybe it's like public ownership of utilities, public ownership of these collective aggregations of PPPs and things like that. How do we redistribute the wealth? So I think those are ways. And maybe education, right? Because we talk about the changing, Jennifer Granholm was flying all over the country saying, we're building a factory here, we're building a factory there, look at all the green jobs that are being created. And so if we can make those jobs available to people who maybe can't afford to go to college. I mean, one of the problems that we're facing right now is that it's hard to find the solar installers. It's hard to find EV charger installers because contractors and construction workers are aging, and you don't have newer people, younger people coming into the trades for a variety of reasons. I think one is because we've got in our head we got to send all our kids to college, or maybe everybody's becoming an Instagram influencer. I don't know what it is, but if we can incentivize people to and make it affordable, like through community college education or vocational training for the people who couldn't afford college to actually get into these trades, well, that's another way you can address equities. So I think there are a lot of
Absolutely. I really appreciate your sharing the education, workforce development, technology innovation, innovative business models, community-driven innovation in general. Great vision, and what you guys are doing at AutoGrid is part of that. So thank you, and thank you for taking the time to talk with us. I know you're headed to dinner, and it's a busy event, so yeah, thanks again.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's really nice to be able to speak to you.
Absolutely. So keep up the great work, and thanks again. And thank you for tuning into the Destination for Innovation. Be sure to connect, collaborate, and create with Anton, and we will see you soon.